everyone, and welcome to Insights on Demand. Thank you so much for joining us. Over the next 3 days, we'll be bringing to life the latest in ELT research and giving you some really practical ideas about how you can implement this research in your own classrooms. I'm Dr. Claire Denbury. I'm the Head of Language Research in Cambridge, and my team works to bring the latest research thinking into the support that we provide for learners and for teachers just like you. Over the next few days together, we'll be taking a deeper look at some key issues in language, pedagogy and skills. And there's something for everyone, whether you've got 5 minutes in your coffee break or a whole day to explore. We'll be premiering 20 fantastic new talks from world experts on topics from engagement to corpus linguistics to mobile learning and so much more. All of these sessions have research findings at the heart, and they'll feature lots of ideas for you to implement with your learners. These sessions, like the one you're watching now, premiere both on YouTube and on Facebook, so teachers like you all around the world can watch at a time that suits you. Our researchers in Cambridge and our amazing speakers will be right there in the chat box and in the comment thread, ready to answer your questions, discuss the sessions, and hear more about your teaching. If you miss a premiere session or would rather have a think about the questions you might want to ask, you can use our event Padlet to post your questions, and our team will answer them before the end of Insights on Demand. Not only do we have these 20 fantastic sessions, you can also access our brand new on-demand library, watch videos, download resources, and get new ideas to support you in your classroom and to help with professional development too. So I really look forward to joining you in the chat. Please do drop us a line with any questions you have. Tell us about how you use research in your teaching. So let's get started. Here's Philip Kerr, who's joining us to talk about personalised learning. I hope you enjoy the session and the rest of Insights on Demand. Thanks.
Hello, a warm hello, and thank you very much for joining me for this session about personalised learning. This session is part of an event called Insights on Demand, run by Cambridge University Press and Cambridge Assessment, and I hope you managed to find the time to attend quite a few of the sessions that are on offer. Okay, well, I should begin perhaps by making an apology. Defining and evaluating personalised learning really isn't the zippiest or the most exciting of titles, is it? Perhaps I should have been a little bit more enthusiastic and come up with something like bringing the wow into your classrooms with personalised learning or something of that kind. But there is a little bit of a problem with personalised learning, and that's what I want to explore for the rest of this session. First of all, the whole question of personalised learning really hinges totally on how we define it. And there's not just one term, there are many terms. We could spell personalised with a British S or an American Z. We could refer to it as differentiation or individualization, or combine this, individualized instruction, personalized instruction. There are a multitude of terms, and they're all used very much interchangeably, often without any clear differentiation between one or the other. And it's very, very difficult to know what we're talking about. So defining personalized learning is at the heart of the enterprise. And that's what I'm attempting to do, even if, and I should say this at the start, we can't really define it in any case. So let's move on. And first of all, a sort of sideways step, if you like. In the world of English language teaching, there's an activity, a task type, which has been around for a long time, which I think we might be able to call personalized language practice. And there's an example of it on the screen here in front of you. As a coursebook writer myself, I've written quite a lot of this kind of stuff, and it's often a gap fill. Maybe there's a verb in brackets or a missing vocabulary item or something like that. And the instructions read, complete the sentences with the missing word or something like that, then work with the partner and change the sentences so that they are true for you. And it's a fairly standard exercise type in most published materials these days. I think the question we have to ask about that, though, is nice as it is as an exercise, does it actually work? Do we know that this kind of personalized language practice will help learning along, move it along more efficiently? And the simple answer is we really don't know. There is no clear research on whether this kind of personalized language practice helps or not. So we have to take it on trust. Looking at this example, I mean, this is a fairly old example from Robert O'Neill's book from the early 1970s. You'd have to say that it isn't actually all that personalized. Writing 5 or more true sentences about yourself using the word ago is not really giving the learners a huge amount of freedom. There's no obvious reason why anyone should want to write 5 sentences using the word ago, except if they wanted to practice the word ago. So there isn't really any real communicative purpose in this exercise. It's a display exercise. And although it may have some value, personalizing, in this case, grammar instruction, and we really don't know. So this is a particular kind of personalized language practice that is very common in English language teaching materials, but this is not what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of the session. There is a second strong tradition of personalization in language teaching. This tradition goes back at least to the 1970s and arguably quite a bit before that. And it's much more of a philosophy than a particular teaching technique. It's much broader in scope and it's much more ambitious. And I'd like to read you a very short extract from this book by René Dissig, dating back to 1975. And in this book, the writer states that each learner is unique in personality, ability, and needs. Education must be personalized to fit the individual. The individual must not be dehumanized in order to meet the needs of an impersonal school system. Educating students in a humane way can lead ultimately to a better society characterized by tolerance, cooperation, and greater concern for others. Quite an interesting example there of how education is going to save society. Whether it's done so or not is another matter altogether. But before moving on, I just need to say a few words about this. This strongly humanistic approach, a humanistic approach to personalizing language learning remains very, very popular in English language teaching. But it isn't what the term personalized learning usually refers to. If you do a Google search and you put in the term personalized learning in your Google search, it's quite interesting to look at the images that come up, and you'll see that many of the images are pictures of children sitting behind laptops, and often they have a kind of a light bulb clicking above their head as they suddenly understood something. What I think this tells us more than anything else is, because of the pictures that come up all of the time, what this tells us is that personalized learning these days almost always refers to technology, and it's concerned with ways in which we can leverage technology to personalize learning for individual students. So since that's what it usually refers to, for the rest of this session, I'm going to be talking just about technology. Personalized learning is big business. It is big, big, big business. And we have here on the screen a little extract from a social media post from the Chan Zuckerberg initiative, the Facebook crowd, in which, well, I'll leave you to read the lines there. The Chan Zuckerberg initiative and other foundations of that kind, such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, have been promoting what they call personalized learning for a number of years now, certainly more than 10. And they've thrown hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into the promotion of this idea of personalized learning. What's always interesting about this is that it is almost always, not entirely exclusively, it's almost always about digital personalized learning, how through a platform or some other digital tool, we can personalize learning for everyone. It's a sort of a mass personalization, if you like. But it's a bit less clear what it is that the people who support, promote personalized learning are actually promoting. What is this thing? It's not about personalized language practice, and it's not about this sort of more humanistic, broadly humanistic philosophy of treating learners as fully humanized individuals with their identities and preferences and emotions and so on. In order to explore this a little further, it makes sense to look at what personalized learning could be. There are only a relatively small number of things that can be personalized, although we can look at these in more detail with or without the use of technology. And I've listed these as three, although the third of these categories is a fairly big one, could possibly contain quite a lot of stuff. But these are the three main areas that I want to be looking at. Goal setting, the rate of learning, and the instructional approach. That's the big one. So I'm going to take these one by one and see what history and research can tell us about experiments to deploy this kind of personalized learning. First of all, then, goal setting. Well, it may be that at some point in your teaching career, you've had a student, probably it'll be a private student, probably quite successful in their professional life. They probably have a level of B2 or above. They know exactly what they want from their English lessons. They're realistic about their expectations, and they are highly motivated. If you've never had a student like this, I highly recommend them. They make life really very, very easy. But of course, most learning contexts are really rather different from this kind of one-on-one instruction that would make personalized goal setting really quite exciting as a possibility. The first big difference between the kind of student that I described just now and the contexts in which most of us work in is that we all have standardized tests on a regular basis. And there's very little that either we as teachers or our students can do to change what is going to be assessed. In most contexts, too, students are studying in groups. We teach them in groups. And a part of the teacher's job is to get the students through the examinations which have been set for them. And we need to get as many of our students through those examinations as possible. This doesn't leave either us or the students with much scope to set personalized goals. In a sense, all of the important things have been decided in advance. So in practice, goal setting, personalized goals, are often within fairly tight parameters. I'd call it personalized light rather than personalized. Learners can choose the order, for example, in which they work through the learning materials, even though the end goal is determined for them. So in an English language program, for example, they might be able to decide that they're going to do the grammar section first, and then follow this with the vocabulary and then the listening, or some other order. But does it really make much difference in which order they tackle the tasks that have been set for them? Probably not, although this clearly depends on so many different factors, but it probably doesn't really make a great deal of difference whether you do the grammar first or the reading first or the pronunciation first. However, having said that, it's certainly very nice as a learner to have that, the possibility of choice, put it like that. So in some ways, goal setting is often simply not practical in most of our contexts. It's nice if we can offer some degree of goal setting within fixed parameters, but in reality, it's unlikely to be much more than that. What students of all kinds do have power over, as opposed to setting their own goals, is they can decide, and there's nothing we can do, well, not a lot we can do about this, they can decide how hard or conversely how little they're going to work. So they can, of course, determine the rate that they'll work through the material, the rate of learning or the rate of studying. Okay, now the idea that we should allow or even encourage students to work at their own rate seems self-evidently a good idea. Intuitively, it's a very good idea. Why, after all, would we make the ones who want to work fast slow down so that they're working at the rate of the slower ones? And why should we make the slower ones speed up when maybe they can't, to keep up with the pace of the faster ones? And this idea of the control over your rate of learning is absolutely central to almost all personalized platform, personalized learning delivered by platforms that's around today. Since this is intuitively such a good idea, it's not really very surprising to discover when we look at the history that it is an idea that has been explored really quite extensively in the past. You'll see a list on the screen here of 4 plans which were carried out in the United States. First of them, the Pueblo plan, going back to the late 19th century, but others at the beginning of the 20th century. And I include in this list programmed instruction, which was popular in the 1960s and 70s. So all of these were tried out, and all of them were quite carefully measured and researched, and a lot has been published on the topic. What they all have in common is this idea that students can work through the learning materials at their own pace, aided by technology of one kind or another. That was the idea behind them all. There were slightly different technologies involved. But one thing they have all in common is that none of these initiatives lasted very long. They failed. And I think the interesting question to ask is why, in these historical attempts to encourage learners to take control of their own rate of learning, why did these experiments not succeed better? Okay, well, I mean, the first answer, perhaps unsurprisingly coming from me as a writer of course books and other educational materials, is that the materials in these plans were simply not very good. They were lacking in variety, they were boring, they were dull. And the way in which these materials were delivered to the students was extremely rigid and very old-fashioned. It was learn, repeat, learn, repeat, learn, repeat, memorize, and then move on. That was fundamentally what was going on behind all of these initiatives. So there was an issue with the design and the production of the materials, but there were other problems, I think, which led to the decision not to repeat these experiments. First of all, in all cases, allowing or encouraging students to work at their own rate causes problems for teachers. It actually means, in most cases, that teachers have more work to do because they'll have to accommodate the different abilities within their class. So there's more work for teachers, apart from getting on top of the technology that they had to use in each case here. It meant more work for administrators. And when the research was done, the gains in learning just didn't turn out to be very good. The learning gains didn't justify the increased costs and the increased time that was required to carry out these experiments. So it was a nice try. Things didn't quite work out. Perhaps we can get things better this time around with better technology. Or perhaps not. Besides the reasons I've mentioned for why these initiatives didn't really work out, there's a broader question here, and that is this particular issue. Most of us, and that is particularly the case, I think, with teenage learners, are not very good at self-regulating their own learning. We prefer to spend time cramming shortly before an exam, or we prefer not to do it at all, or we put things off and leave things to the last minute. But on the whole, learners, especially in high schools, but also in junior schools, are not very good at self-regulating. They need help with this, but we can't, on the whole, just let them get on with it. And what they want, and simply catering to what they want, isn't necessarily providing them with what they need. I think, in a sense, we all know this, especially if you've been involved in any kind of blended teaching. When in a blended environment, some of the students are working much faster than others in the home study material, the inevitable result of this is that when they come into the classroom, the ability gaps are widened, not narrowed. The better students will work harder, the less successful students will work less because they're less motivated. So you have this ability gap emerging and growing in situations where self-pacing is allowed as part of the program. This is not something which is easily resolved so long as we carry on having face-to-face classes with students of different abilities. There have been attempts to personalize this, but on the whole, they've caused more problems than they've solved. And there's a lovely moment in one of the Simpsons cartoons where Bart Simpson he's been kicked out of his regular class and he's been put into what is described as a more personalized approach for the slower learners in his group. And this group of slower learners are sitting there together. They're not necessarily less intelligent than the more advanced learners, but for various reasons, they're not making the progress. And at one point, Bart Simpson says, hey, hang on. So we're behind the rest of the class And putting us in this slower moving class is going to help us catch up with the others. Cooey, he says. Okay. Before I move on to the third big category, one final thing I'd like to say about the rate of learning. When René Disick and others were investigating how allowing self-pacing might accelerate learning back in the 1970s, quite a lot of research was carried out. And the conclusion of this research was that the benefits of self-pacing were inconclusive. There may be some gains for some learners some of the time, but for many others, in many other contexts, self-pacing didn't work. And there's no particular reason to think that it'll work any better with better technology. So something to explore, but not something we can really sort of pin our faith on. Let's move on. The third big area is instructional approach, and I need to break this down into smaller categories. One of the most obvious ways, I think, of personalizing learning is by catering to the learner's personal interests. And teachers, if they have enough time, which is not always the case, can be very, very good at selecting materials or activities, topics, media, whatever it may be for their learners, because they know that their learners will respond well. Or they may be able to suggest more personalized stuff for self-study. Teachers are good at this on the whole, if they have enough time. Algorithms, however, which are used in the automated platforms, are not so successful at identifying what people are really interested in. Perhaps one of the most expensive and sophisticated recommendation tools, which is run by algorithms, is the recommendation system on Amazon, if you buy things from Amazon. And I use it, unfortunately, quite a lot. But it is really extraordinary how bad Amazon is at predicting what it is that I'm interested in, what I like, and what I might buy next. So if Amazon can't get it right, we're going to struggle if we try to do it in an automated way. So we can try, but it's difficult to automate it. Better, I think, if it's done with direct human contact and human personal knowledge. But again, I think the implication that's very important here is if a teacher is personalizing the content, the materials, the media, the methodology even for individual learners, how much work does this imply for the teacher? How realistic is it? There will simply have to be compromises of one kind or another. So a more limited choice of options makes everything more manageable. So again, even if we attempt to personalize the materials in this way, it's not totally personalized. It's only partially so. And again, the big question is one of cost. All of the materials or the media that are being used, they need to be written, curated, updated, checked, and so on. And all of this costs really quite a lot of money. So the real question is, how much do you want to spend in order to make things personalized in this way? In terms of methodological approach, it may also be the case that some learners would prefer a particular kind of approach. Do they want everything in English? Or, for example, or would they prefer to have a big chunk of the content in their own language? If they're watching a video, and they're going to be watching videos at some point, do they want to have various options for subtitles or captions, which they can toggle on and off when they want? Or are we going to dictate that for them? Do they prefer video to audio, or would they prefer audio to video? Or would they actually prefer written text, an old-fashioned book or something of that kind? They might have particular preferences for the kind of feedback that they want to get. Some learners like to be corrected on everything. Others will benefit more from a more supportive and encouraging kind of feedback. So we can personalize this feedback too. On a very significant level, they may also have preferences in terms of whether they prefer to work individually or with a buddy. Or perhaps they want some kind of combination of these preferences. Well, again, only so much is possible. And the more that we cater to individual preferences, the more expensive the system will be. So the big question again is how much do you want to spend? The third bullet point here is for me, at any rate, the most interesting of all of the things that I've discussed so far. When we're talking about specific learner differences, digital technology, I think, has a huge amount to offer. In fact, I think it probably has more to offer in this context of specific learner differences than in any other way in terms of personalized instruction. What I mean by this is it's fairly easy through digital technology to use other digital technologies which will make life manageable, or make learning manageable for all sorts of learners. Text-to-speech and speech-to-text applications, for example, can make learning material accessible to many learners who would otherwise find it basically inaccessible. We can easily play around with fonts and spacing and color and page layout, and we can design all of these things, and we can even automate it in some cases to make material more accessible for learners with dyslexia. We can have variable speed recorders, which can be very helpful too. And I think all of this, the sort of the technological affordances of helping individuals to personalize learning for specific learner differences, is something surely which we can celebrate. Okay. Those then are the main kind of areas where we could personalize in some way. What I've been arguing, I suppose, basically is that personalized learning itself is just a slogan. It's a good slogan for marketing purposes because it just sounds like a good thing. You know, how could you be against personalized learning? But the trouble is that this term personalized learning means many, many things, not one thing, and it means different things to different people. Some of these things, like personalized goal setting, the first one here, may simply not be an option in your teaching context. Others, like the rate of learning or self-pacing, may be very difficult for you to manage given the rest of the institutional setup. They may increase your workload and may increase the workload of others without leading to really significant learning gains. And others, like signing or captions for the deaf, may make learning a much more inclusive experience for some learners. So what I'm suggesting, I suppose, is that we stop talking about personalized learning altogether, and whichever of these aspects of personalized learning that we're particularly interested in, we have that very clear in our mind. One kind of learning may be perceived as being more personalized than another, but that doesn't necessarily make it intrinsically any better. Okay, as we move on, I need to talk a little bit about the research that's available out there. With the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars that have been invested in promoting personalized learning, it's unsurprising, I think, that there's been quite a lot of research carried out in large part by the same people who've been funding the experiments. These are three recent pieces of research, and unfortunately for those promoting personalized learning, the research is simply not confirming the hype. The first of these, published in 2015, was an interesting one. The title of this piece of research was Continued Progress, Promising Evidence on Personalized Learning. But when you actually read the report, it's really rather different. For something which claims to be promising evidence, the report didn't actually manage to come up with any firm or unequivocal evidence at all. They concluded that no single element of personalized learning was able to discriminate between the different schools in the study, with the largest achievement effect and the others in the sample. That is to say that these big experiments carried out in American schools to personalized learning didn't really lead to significant gains. A couple of years later, there was a second report also published by the Rand Corporation, and again, it was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who have a vested interest in checking that what they're investing their money in is worth investing in. And in this report, the results were not really very different. They gave a very hedged conclusion. They said there's suggestive evidence that greater implementation of personalized learning may be related to more positive effects on achievement. However, this requires further confirmation through more research. So the message that's coming from these big research projects is certainly a very mixed one, and one that cautions us to remain very skeptical, I think. So I think that the dream of industrial scale personalized learning, that's a very sort of strange paradox, mass personalization. I think this dream of mass personalization is probably only so much pie in the sky. There's only so far we can take it, and is always going to be limited to one extent or another. But there are, I think, three important things that we can take away from this overview of personalized learning, or the personalized learning landscape. So I'm going to phrase these as three questions, and these are three questions which we could ask ourselves whether we're developers of personalized learning platforms, or whether we are teachers using these platforms, or whether we're just regular face-to-face teachers in a non-technological context. So the first of these questions, I think, that is raised by the personalized learning issue is this: how inclusive, in every sense of the word inclusive, are the materials and the media we use and the things we ask our learners to do with them? And I think that's a question of fundamental importance, and whether we're using technology or not. How inclusive are we really? My second big question is this: to what extent do we really show full respect to our students as individuals with their identities and their beliefs, with their emotions and their preferences, and of course with their first languages? To what extent do we really show full respect to our students as fuller individuals? And the third big question is this: to what extent do we see ourselves, what do we see our, sorry, I'll start again. To what extent do we see our roles as teachers as primarily motivators of our learners, as opposed to, say, facilitators and transmitters of knowledge? Again, it's a big, big question, and it's one that personalized learning approaches will need to take on board, because without the autonomy and the self-regulation that successful learners have, personalized learning is unlikely to help them very much. And on that note, I'd like to leave you. But I'd like to ask you one final question. I said at the beginning that defining and evaluating personalized learning wasn't the best title for this presentation. So my question to you now is, can you think of a better one? And if you can, could you put a suggested improvement on the title in the chat? Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions in the Insights on Demand event, and I hope that you've found plenty of food for thought in the last 30 minutes. Thanks again. Bye-bye.